Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at the iPhone 11 Pro. I am upgrading to this phone from my iPhone 10 that I bought about 2 years ago. I didn't upgrade last year just because the 10s didn't offer anything all that new. This phone offered just enough new things to compel me to upgrade, and it's all in these 3 camera lenses here. I use my iPhone a lot here on the channel for B-roll and a lot of the stuff that we do on the Extras channel, and that was what got me to take a look at upgrading to this one. I'm pretty happy that I did, but really it looks and feels and performs a lot like my iPhone 10 did. It doesn't feel all that new to me, and I think if you're very happy with the phone that you have, you might want to stay put for another year just because there isn't all that much different here beyond a significantly upgraded camera. And I think this speaks to kind of the maturity of the smartphone marketplace, where these phones really have hit a point where you can't add all that much more to them at this point, given the current technology limitations. But what we're going to do in this video is look at some of the new features of this phone, primarily the camera. We'll do some comparison talk here as to what this one can do that the others can't do, and I'll let you know my overall thoughts as we work our way through the review here. Now, I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that I paid for this with my own funds, all $1,200 worth or thereabouts. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own. Nobody is paying for this review, nor has anyone reviewed or approved what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into it now and see what this phone is all about. So let's take a closer look now at the hardware. There are 2 configurations of the Pro model. This is the regular Pro with a 5.8-inch screen, and then there is the Pro Max that has a 6.5-inch screen. That larger phone is too big for me, which is why I went with the smaller phone here. The larger phone will give you slightly better battery life, but again, I like something that I can more comfortably fit in my pocket and get mostly across the screen with a single thumb here, which I can't do on the larger phone. Apple also has an iPhone 11, which is not a Pro. That one has a larger screen than this one as well, a 6.2-inch display that does cost less but doesn't have all the features that the Pro models have. If you like a small phone and don't want to spend top dollar for this one, the iPhone 8 is still being sold. They have a 4.7-inch model that's very close in size insofar as how it feels in your hand, and that one might be worth looking at if you don't want a large phone from Apple. So be on the lookout for all those different options on their website. But today we're going to focus on the 11 Pro. Now, like the iPhone 10 and 10s before it, it's got a very nice display. This is what they call a Super Retina XDR display. Again, 5.8 inches, 458 points per inch, so it's a very sharp display, very good crisp text and photos on it. A real pleasure to look at, a really nice contrast ratio that they say is double last year's. They say it's 2 million to 1 versus 1 million to 1. But to be perfectly honest with you, and looking at this display and looking at my iPhone 10 every day for the last 2 years, nothing on the display jumped out at me as being all that different. The only big difference I noticed was when I turned up the brightness here. It goes really bright, up to 800 nits in normal usage, and they say 1200 nits in certain HDR instances. So the brightness is better, but again, you're not going to notice a difference. In fact, it just looked exactly the same to me when I first booted it up. Maybe when I start watching some more movies on it, I might notice that contrast ratio, but really, there was nothing new here, at least from what I could see on the display. Now, if display quality is important to you and you're kind of on the fence as to whether or not you need an iPhone 11 Pro or the regular iPhone 11, I would go to an Apple store and just check out the displays for yourself. The OLED really makes a difference versus the LED backlit displays that they're using on the other phones, including the regular 11 and the iPhone 8. It really does have a much better image quality that is very noticeable, but again, it's not anything groundbreaking versus what we saw in the last iteration of the iPhone 10s and 10. Now, the price on these is not cheap. This is a premium phone, and it's Apple, so you're going to be paying for it. It starts at $1,000 for the 64 gigabyte version. The Max one starts at $1,100. I paid $1,149 to get the 256 gigabytes of storage. The larger version of the 256 phone is $1249, and there's also a 512 gig version for even more. So you're going to spend quite a bit on this phone, just like the last two iterations were costing you. They do have, of course, payment options you can do. You can do the iPhone leasing thing where you can get a new phone every year. I just buy them outright because I do use them quite a bit here on the channel. I also opted for AppleCare, which is another $200, and I did that last year as well. And the reason why you might want to look at AppleCare is that the phone is essentially made out of glass. Both the front and the back are glass, and if you happen to break the back, you have to replace the entire phone. So AppleCare gives you a fairly reasonable deductible. I did break my last phone, but I was lucky in that I also had a warranty issue, so I ended up not having to pay the deductible when I called the Apple helpline for help with my phone. But just be advised, you get two $50 deductible replacements, I believe, on the $200 AppleCare plan, and I think that's probably the only option you have for ensuring that your very expensive phone doesn't end up being a doorstop. I would also suggest getting a nice case for it. I'll start exploring cases on the Extras channel in the coming weeks to see what's out there. Because again, these things are brittle, they're glass. Even though they say they are sturdier than before, the fact is a good drop will end its sturdiness right out of the gate there. So just be ready for that case purchase. I think it will be important. Other than that, it feels, again, a lot similar in the hand. Weight on the new phone is pretty much the same as last go-around. It's 6.63 ounces or 188 grams. The larger phone is 7.97 ounces or 226 grams. The weight is slightly heavier than my iPhone 10, but pretty much the same. The back of the phone, of course, looks different with the different cameras that we have now on the back. They also frosted the rear glass here, so it's a little less slippery. It has a nice grip to it. But again, I think you really want to use a case on this phone so you don't end up with a life-ending crack on your back. The back is glass because it supports wireless charging. I tested it with all the wireless chargers here in the house, and it's working fine there. They did not update the port on this, so the iPhone 10 and the 10s and all the iPhones before it use the Apple Lightning connector, which you've probably seen before. So if you have peripherals that you're using with your existing phone, they will also work here. I was expecting them to move to USB-C, given that the iPads are moving in that direction, but they're still sticking with that Lightning connector there. But the phone now does come with a fast charging adapter that will charge your phone a lot faster than before. And the charger is USB-C, so what you'll get in the box is a USB-C to Lightning cable so that you can take advantage of that faster charging, which I think is a good step in the right direction for the iPhone. Nice to get that in the box, especially given the price we're paying. What you don't get anymore, though, is the headphone adapter cable. Prior iterations gave you an adapter to go from Lightning to the headphone jack. You don't get that any longer with the new iPhone 10 Pro, so be prepared to buy that separately. Like the other iPhone 10s, you've got the Face ID versus the fingerprint sensor. Face ID is a little faster now than it was before, but it works exactly the same way it did in the prior version. Like before, also, there's no home button, so you swipe up to get into the phone like this or to get out to the home screen again. I'm going to link you down below to my iPhone 10 review where I show you how all the new interfaces work. So if you are moving from a phone that has a home button, you can see how the new iPhones work. Now, Apple is promising better battery life with the new phone based on some optimizations that they've made in the processor and some of the other components. And I am seeing much better battery life on this phone versus my iPhone 10. I use my phone a lot for a lot of different things, including video and checking up on my social media accounts and my YouTube management and everything. I've been doing all of that with this phone, plus all of the things that I've been doing to review it, and the battery has been holding up throughout the entire day, and that's not something I would always get out of my iPhone 10. So I think there is an improvement here. Part of it might be the new technology, but it also might be that I have a new battery in this phone versus the older battery that's now in my iPhone 10. The more you use these batteries, the worse they get insofar as their longevity is concerned. My iPhone 10's battery report comes in at around 91%, which means that it's not holding the same level of charge as it did when I first got it. So this phone is doing better now. Down the road, it will certainly degrade and we'll see lesser battery life. But I would guess that 2 years later, if I'm still using this phone, it might be in a better position than my current iPhone is at its point in its life. Now, the processor in here has been bumped up a little bit. You now have a A13 Bionic versus an A12 in the XS versus an A11 in the regular iPhone X. And what I do every year when one of these new phones comes out is we run a benchmark test from 3D Mark called the Slingshot test. It measures the graphical capabilities of the processor and its computational capabilities, and we're able to run this cross-platform. And on that Slingshot test, you can see we got a score of 10,586 for the iPhone 11 Pro. It's a nice upgrade over the XS, both on its graphics performance and its CPU performance, and I think a pretty big update over the iPhone X from 2 years ago. But also take a look at the iPad Pro that came out last year. It is still dominating this test and performs significantly faster than all of the other devices we have here on screen. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see an updated iPad at some point with a faster version of this same processor. I also want to pull up a result from an Android device, namely the NVIDIA Shield TV, and that one came in at 5,132. And the reason why I'm pointing out the NVIDIA Shield here is that the chip that powers the Shield is the same chip that's in the Nintendo Switch, and I don't think anyone would argue that the gameplay experience on the Nintendo Switch is far greater than what we see on these mobile devices, including these much more powerful iPhones and iPads. And the reason is that there hasn't been a marketplace for gaming on mobile devices. They're either free-to-play apps that just try to extract money out of you constantly, or the apps cost a couple of dollars, which is not enough to really fund these developers to the extent that they need to push the hardware further. One thing I did do, though, is I subscribed to the Apple Arcade for the free trial just to see what it's like. And the games aren't too great in here yet. I got to really poke around a little bit more to see what's there. But hopefully, if this subscription service takes off, we might see developers incentivized to start taking advantage of what these processors can do, because you're really looking at something here that can double the performance of a Nintendo Switch and deliver a much richer gaming experience. And these devices now work with Xbox and PlayStation controllers as well, so you can really get more out of them for gaming than you could in the past. So we'll have to see what happens here with the arcade and whether or not that improves the gaming situation on the iPhone. A lot of the power of these devices, though, goes to the cameras, and that is where we're going to spend a lot of time. So let's dig in now and see what's new about this camera system. So let's take a look at the rear cameras that we've got here on the phone, and then we'll work our way around to the front. Dramatically improved camera system here. These cameras can do 12 megapixel photos each. They also can do video 4K at up to 60 frames per second. They support slow motion video at 240 frames per second at 1080p, and they can also do 120 frames per second if you don't want as slow a slow-mo shot on the back here. Now, the first camera we're going to look at is the ultra-wide camera. It has a 13 millimeter focal length, and it can pick up a 120-degree field of view. So it's similar in some ways to what you might get out of a GoPro or an action camera, and you can do some really cool video and photo composition with this. It's really fun to experiment with a wide-angle lens, and it's nice to have a nice high-quality wide-angle lens here on a phone. The aperture is 2.4, so it's not going to do as well in low light, unfortunately, but outdoors it does great, and it's a nice addition to the other lenses that you have here on the camera. Now, you also have what they call the wide camera here. So this one's the ultra wide, this one is the regular wide. This one's a 26 millimeter focal length, much better in low light in that it has a 1.8 aperture. They also have optical image stabilization on this lens, but not on this one. So if you're out doing some video, as you can see here, the ultra wide will not have as smooth a shot as the wide one will. But it will do pretty well digitally to kind of smooth things out. But if you are really looking to have a stable handheld shot, you'll probably want to do it out of the wide lens versus the ultra wide. And then we have the telephoto camera here at the bottom. And this one I am really thinking is the biggest improvement out of all of them. I like the ultra wide, but the one here at the bottom is a 52 millimeter focal length, but they've improved the low light on it. It's now a 2.0 aperture. and I believe the last version of this lens was 2.4. So it's a pretty nice bump in pickup quality. And you also get a much nicer bokeh, which means that when you're focusing on something in the foreground, the background will look nice and blurry. And it's a natural blur because you're using the camera's optics here and not the digital portrait mode, which I will show you in a few minutes. So you can really get some nice portrait mode pictures here without having to opt for the digital portrait mode to do it. And I was really, really pleased with how nice this lens works. I got a lot of great photos out of it, and I think it's the lens that I'm going to be using the most with on this new phone because it looks spectacular. And you also get optical image stabilization on the telephoto lens as well. So you've got it on 2 of the 3 lenses on the back of the camera. The front camera has been improved a bit as well. 12 megapixel photos. It's got a 2.2 aperture. It supports portrait mode as it did before, but it now can shoot 4K video at 60 frames per second. And you can see a little shot I did with my dog here a little bit earlier. So now all 4 cameras on the phone can shoot 4K video at 60, and I think that is a great improvement. Soon there's going to be an update to allow you to shoot on multiple cameras at the same time and record it. You'll be able to do it on this phone and the XS as well. I think that's going to be a great feature we'll be seeing on some of the third-party video apps very shortly, so be on the lookout for that if you have this new phone or the XS. I'm looking forward to that quite a bit. It also does slow motion footage out of the front camera now, 120 frames per second that you'll get on the slow-mo on the front at 1080p. I believe Apple is now calling this a Slowfie or something for whatever that is. So that is the camera system overall. Let's dive in now and see how it all works. So we have the Apple Camera app loaded up right now, and what I've got the camera set to is the regular wide lens. They call it 1x. Now if I go to 0.5 here, you can see it pulls out and gives us a much wider image out of that ultra-wide camera. You can get a feel for the differences here. This is more pronounced when you're outside. You can pick up a lot more of a landscape when you do switch into that ultra-wide mode. It looks great, and here you can get more of an indoor sense of that. And then I can go from ultra-wide over to telephoto or over to wide and back to telephoto, and this gives you a sense as to what you can pick up with your lens options here. So it's really nice to have that ultra-wide there as an option. Now, one thing you're probably noticing is that the border of my image is in the middle, but we're seeing other imagery here on the top and bottom. And I'm going to show you what that's all about in a second as we go through some of this stuff. But I wanted to go over to the video mode first. Now, one of my biggest gripes with the Apple Camera app is that it's not easy to switch resolutions in the app. In fact, you can't do it at all. So what you have to do is go out, go to settings, go into the camera settings, and then adjust your desired video resolution and frame rate there. So that problem still persists in this version. Now right now I've got it set to 1080p at 60 frames per second, and this will allow me to switch between camera lenses on the fly even when I'm recording. So right now we're at the 1x. I can hit the 2x there, and you can see it has a nice little digital zoom to it. I can go out to the wide angle here and then jump back to 1 and go back to 2. It does a nice job of trying to keep all of the color balance in check between the lenses here. Now this feature only seems to work though when I am shooting 1080p video. At 4K you can do some digital zooming and whatnot, but it doesn't have the ability to switch between the lenses when you're shooting 4K at 60 frames per second. And if you're shooting a video and want to have something a little smoother, you can hold down the lens selection here, and you can then just drag the little dial here to get a smoother transition if that's what you're looking for. I found in prior iterations of the iPhone, sometimes it'll actually switch lenses, and other times it might try to do some kind of digital zoom. So there's a lot that the processor kind of does on your behalf, and you're not always sure what it's doing, but you can try to get a smoother zoom here if you invoke it that way. Now the camera also has the ability to do what they call shooting outside the frame. So if we jump back over to my phone here, you can see that we have this picture on the wall framed up, and our picture border will be the square that you see here that's not dimmed out. But in this section we're seeing a portion of the door, and we're also seeing a little bit more of the room here to the left. Now if I take this picture and we jump over to my photo roll here, what we'll be able to do with this is actually crop in more of the photo than what you're seeing now. So what I can do is go over to Edit, and unfortunately it doesn't stream this over my video capture system, so we'll zoom in a second after we do the work. But you're going to see that it's got this little star and a square next to it, which indicates we have more photo available to work on. I'm finding that this is very temperamental. It's not always working on every photo that I go to edit, so I think there might be some updates we'll see to this as Apple rolls out some updates of its operating system. But if I go to Edit here and go over to Crop, what we're going to see now is the ability to pick up more of the image. And it got this from the other lens and stitched it together. So on the other phone, the wide-angle lens would have caught what you see here, and that is it. But this new phone can integrate the lower lens as you're shooting to give you a little bit more crop area to play with. Now, it'll keep that additional imagery for 30 days. If you don't do anything with it, it will erase it, but you'll still have the original photo, of course. And this will also work on the telephoto lens. So if I zoom in here with the telephoto lens and take a picture, we still have some of the door frame and more of the room over here because it's using the 1x lens to supplement things. So once again here, we've got the little star there. I can go over here to Edit. And if I go back to Crop, hopefully it'll work on this one too, you can see that I've got a bit of the door frame there that didn't appear in the original photo. So there is a little bit more to these pictures that you can decide to use later. Now, in order to use this feature, you do have to enable it in the camera settings. You have to go into Settings, go over to Camera, and then look for it under Composition. And you have to check on Photos Capture Outside the Frame. My phone had videos enabled for this feature as well, but every video I've shot has not given me any additional information to crop into my video as I'm looking at it. So it looks like that feature is something perhaps that's coming later, or maybe just is buggy at the moment. One thing you also need to have is enough light. So what I found a lot of times if I'm shooting in a darker room, if that ultra-wide lens is not getting enough light to make its part of the image work, it'll just black out those dimmed areas on your photo, and you'll only get the active lens that you're shooting with. Now, you also have portrait mode on this phone like you did on previous versions of it. I found it does better with people versus objects. But one thing that's new on this phone is that you can choose the lens that you do portrait mode from. So you can use the 2x lens here or zoom out to a wider shot with the 1x lens, and it looks like it's using the lens below it to get the depth information. So that was a nice addition there. But the overall quality of the portrait mode photos feels about the same. This is largely a software feature, and they've been improving the feature on the other versions of the iPhone that have it as well. So I didn't see anything groundbreakingly different or better with this phone beyond the fact that you can choose now the lens that you're using for taking those portrait mode photos. And again, the front-facing camera can also do portrait mode. Now, the phone also has something called night mode, which allows you to shoot in almost total darkness. And I went outside last night before the moon came up. It was very dark out. All I had was that street lamp down the street that you can see here, and the phone did a very nice job of presenting a usable image. It does that through a long exposure, it does a lot of processing, and it gives you what you see here. So it looks good if you're doing a video or a social media post or something, but if you zoom in closer, you can see there's a lot of noise in this image and probably won't work very well as a print or something that you might crop and zoom. But in a completely dark environment, it's probably better than nothing. I also had my Google Pixel 3a with me that we looked at a few weeks ago that also has a night mode that I thought was very good, but I think the iPhone's night mode, at least in this scenario, is a little bit better. So overall, I'm very pleased with this as a camera. I like the additional lens option. I think the improvements they made to the telephoto lens are substantial, and I'm really enjoying taking pictures with that particular lens. So I'm very happy with that. And the more I've been using this, the more I've been thinking about why don't they just market these things as cameras versus phones. If you go on Apple's website, the camera is all they're talking about, because the rest of the phone here is largely the same as what you've already experienced. When I went from my iPhone 7 to the iPhone 10, that was a big different change. Things worked differently, had a better screen, there was a lot of different things to it. This one really feels the same as what I was using, minus the additional camera options here on the back. That is it. So I think if you are on the iPhone 10 and you're happy with it, there's no need to upgrade here. You can go for a third year with the phone you already have. That's my same recommendation for folks with the XS. You've got a slightly better camera than the 10. This one is better than what you got, but not that much better. So I think there really isn't much of a reason to upgrade. If you're down on the iPhone 5 or 6 or something, this is a huge jump up. But really from the functionality of the things that you do as a smartphone, it really will not give you anything all that new. The big change here is the camera and perhaps some of the technology inside driving it, but that is it. And that's what's been kind of boring me lately about the smartphone industry. We're just not seeing anything new and innovative. And I was hoping Apple might have done something a little bit more, given that this went up a notch from a 10 to an 11. I think really this might be like an iPhone 10.5 versus something that deserves a whole new number. But nonetheless, I'm pleased with the camera output. It's going to accomplish additional things that I want to do with it here on the channel, so that's good. But I think for many consumers, if you've got an iPhone 10 or even an iPhone 7, you might be just fine staying put for another year or two. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. And until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters, the 4 Guys with Quarters podcast, Chris Allegretta, Tom Albrecht, Mike Talbert, Brian Parker, and Kalyan Kumar. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/s.